Domestic violence comes in many forms: physical, emotional, spiritual, even economic. It affects all races and socioeconomic groups. But within the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, there are additional cultural factors that make it harder for victims to identify and come forward to seek help. According to the Asian and Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence, Eastern values of conflict avoidance, collective family welfare, and the value of endurance are a few reasons why Asians seek help less than any other racial group. Today, we're going to take a closer look at those cultural influences that shape the way Asian Americans view and deal with intimate domestic violence. To help us better understand the issue, we're joined by Caroline Strunk, a pre-licensed therapist with the Women's Center specializing in multicultural issues and domestic violence. And we also have Kaylie Nguyen, a case manager for Domestic Violence Resource Project. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Before we get into our discussion, though, I want to play a video interview with a domestic violence survivor. Her identity and voice have been concealed. Let's take a look.
It started when I came to the United States and got much worse 5 years later when my second child was born. From the very beginning, he criticized me almost every day. Then he started insulting me and my parents and my family. His husband was active in the community and the church, and he badmouthed me that I was a bad person and he was a good husband. In Chinese culture, when one is perceived as a leader, one does not do things like abusing his wife. Another Chinese culture value is that when bad things happen inside the family, it should not be spread to outside the family. Many Asian Americans believe that the only abuse is physical abuse. They must learn that mental and emotional abuse is also abuse. It was very demeaning when he told me to clean the toilet without using a brush. He told me to use my hand to clean the toilet. He said many times the toilet should be clean enough to drink water from it. To check my cleaning, he put his nose close to the toilet and sniffed. For a long time, I got little support because people did not want to believe that my ex-husband, who was perceived as leader in the community and who seems to be charming, could also be an abuser. In 2004, I started to seek help from community and government program. When he found out, he became more violent and vicious. His abuse caused me to develop severe symptoms of depression, high blood pressure, heart problem. A single parents group at the church helped me and introduced me to the Montgomery County Abuse Person Program. I was referred to psychiatric and psychological counseling, and I start to get the treatment and take medicine. There are few Asian American mental health counselors and social workers who understand our culture. A few Asian American heritage professionals do not have adequate training and sometimes become biased and critical of the victim rather than helping victim.
That's a very hard video to watch, but a story that you two probably are too familiar with. Kaylie, as a case manager for DVRP, what types of abuse do most of your clients come in seeking help for?
I can say for DVRP last year, we work with clients who comes in with verbal abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse. So it comes in all forms, and it's just one of the myths that people think is domestic violence is only physical, and it's not. It comes in many forms.
And Caroline, as you heard from the interview, there certainly are cultural factors at play. In your practice, what sorts of barriers do your clients cite for being afraid to even come out to seek help, or maybe even not realize that it is abuse?
I think it's all of those things. I think that culture plays such a huge role, not just in why domestic violence happens in Asian communities, but how it happens, but most importantly, how those who experience it respond or even conceptualize abuse. So some of the biggest barriers are actually the cultural pieces themselves. Some of the norms, for instance, in Asian culture tends to be very patriarchal, and so unfortunately, oftentimes hitting one's spouse or being physically abusive or even this idea of exerting control over your spouse is normalized. And then on the other hand, you have values. For instance, strong face-saving values, the desire to avoid bringing shame upon oneself and one's family, prioritizing group harmony often at great personal cost, making sacrifices, and just so many of these factors play off of one another and really perpetuate this sort of culture of silence.
Kaylie, with your work at DVRP, how do you take those cultural influences and help people feel comfortable and feel like their stories will be heard by people who understand those cultural issues?
Yes, so we work by listening to survivors, and we have 4 different case managers on staff who speaks different languages. And if we don't have that language, we go and use language access or interpreter services, so we can better understand and connect and talk to our clients so they can get access to those services. You know, with our organization, we're completely different. We make sure we're there from the beginning to the end. We just don't stop just because they got a protection order. You know, we make sure that she is empowered throughout the whole process and helping to rebuild her life after abuse.
Caroline, a lot of people don't understand how somebody can stay in an abusive relationship. What are some of the psychological things that are happening within an abused person's psyche that keeps them there?
That is such an important question, and one that unfortunately survivors of domestic violence get asked way too often is, why did you stay? Why do you stay now? One of the big pieces is that if there really is a threat of physical safety, it's been well documented that the most dangerous time for a woman to leave an abusive relationship, that is the most dangerous period, because that's often when the retaliation tends to be the most physical and often lethal. So there's that piece. But often just because of the nature of domestic violence, when it happens, a lot of times the abusers cut off and isolate the victims from sources of social support such as family and friends, so that they may feel that they have nowhere to go. But on top of that, the cultural factors kind of add an additional barrier where they might feel again that if they leave or divorce their husbands, they might bring this huge stigma and shame upon their families, and that plays a significant role. And really, they might not even conceptualize it as abuse in the first place. They might understand that it doesn't feel quite right, but they don't use the terminology of abuse to characterize what's happening. And so they might feel that they don't have the grounds or justification to leave.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked about the different forms abuse can take, but something that a lot of people may not even be familiar with, Kaylie, is this term in-law abuse. That does come up quite often when we're talking about Asian American victims of domestic violence. What is in-law abuse?
So it's abusive behaviors towards their children's spouses is in-law abuse. And in-law abuse stems from the complexity of family structures and relationship. And the signs of in-law abuse are the same as those who are in intimate partner abuse. They go through pretty similar types of abuse: isolation, verbal abuse, domestic servitude, their food intake is being controlled by the in-laws. And it's fear that keeps many domestic violence victims from leaving, and shame hold them back from reporting beatings or pressing charges against the abuser. And even if an abused woman is able to break away from the abuse, she may fear about being separated from her children, or being relocated into an unfamiliar area. So all those things are factors that keeps victims to stay in the relationship.
And in particular with Asian American families and the in-law abuse, for example, in Korea, it was long traditional for new wives to move in with their husband's family and so share the same household with his husband's parents. And so there's more opportunity like that for abuse to happen, and also just a general attitude that you have to respect your husband's parents. Those are all contributing factors to why somebody may continue to be in an abusive relationship with the in-laws.
Yes. So that's why we work really hard to provide outreach and raise awareness of domestic violence and sexual assault, and getting people to understand the dynamics of healthy and unhealthy relationship, and break up those stigmas and the traditions and values, and explain to clients who come in and access to our services.
Those traditions, Caroline, that a lot of first-generation Asian immigrants still hold dearly to are sometimes in quite contrast with Western values. How do you help your clients bridge that gap between what they're used to and what they're not supposed to talk about with it's safe here, we have resources? How do you bridge that gap?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I think acculturation is one of the most complex pieces of this kind of whole domestic violence equation in terms of Asian Americans. So I think one of the ways that we have to be very careful is the language that we use. If, say, someone from a first generation Asian family doesn't agree with how we conceptualize abuse, and we come in and we try to tell them, you are in an abusive relationship, you might scare them off, they might shut down, they might reject that idea, you might never see them again, and then you've lost that opportunity to help them. But if instead you maybe focus on, for instance, how their partner's actions make them feel, and focus on that, or how they see the impacts on their children, I think sometimes you often get a very different reaction.
The idea of family cohesiveness, Kaylie, is probably a very strong factor for why someone may or may not seek help. How do you help your clients take care of the family issue where they're worried about what's going to happen to their children? How do you help them with that?
So we work with them by just providing all the resources, all the information, and to empower them, to make sure they know all their rights, and connect them to services so they can make a better decision about their own lives. We're here to empower them. They know their situation best. So as much information as we can give them, they will make their decisions for their own safety. And we will safety plan, meaning to work with them to make sure whatever options they decide to go is safe. There's pros and cons. We'll walk through a plan with them to make sure whatever options they choose will be feasible for them.
Caroline, last question for you. Because domestic violence is not talked about very openly, do you think that affects the way that the victims feel, well, I must be the only one, or maybe it's not that bad because nobody else seems to be having this problem? Do you run into that as well?
Absolutely. Even though, in the Asian American community, statistics about domestic violence can be very misleading, oftentimes because there isn't a lot of data there. And I think in part that comes from the fact that there aren't a lot of people asking questions, and the people who could answer the questions are maybe unwilling or feel that they are unable to. I think because of this culture of silence, where they feel like they can't come forward and bring shame upon their families, or call negative attention to themselves, a lot of times they do sort of live in a vacuum at times and feel that, this is only their fault, or this is something that is unique to their family. And so I think that it's changing as there is more outreach in the community, and the way that they perceive domestic violence, but also mental health services and counseling, is slowly shifting in the community. But that feeling of isolation is still definitely there.
A very important conversation we're having today with our guests, Caroline Strunk and Kaylie Nguyen. Thank you so much for joining us and letting us know a little bit more about the cultural factors that affect domestic violence within the Asian American community. We're going to take a short break.
Hello, my name is Cheryl. I lived in the shadows for many years because I was afraid of my partner. I've come out of the darkness to talk directly with you. I may not look like you or sound like you, but in many ways I may be the same as you. I am a survivor of domestic violence. No one should be afraid of their partner. Every person should feel safe. Please call 240-773-0444 for help.
Hey, Mom. I got the job.
You've got the job. Welcome aboard.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Donate to Goodwill. Help provide job training in your community.
Welcome back. We're taking a closer look at domestic violence within the Asian American community. Language and cultural barriers often prevent victims from seeking professional help. Montgomery County proudly provides resources in various languages and has a diverse enough staff to make all people of color comfortable coming forward. We're joined now by two people who work tirelessly for survivors of domestic violence. Smita Varya is with the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and Donna Rissmiller is an attorney and a founding member of DVS Legal Services. Thanks both for being with us today.
Thank you.
Smita, let's start with you. You are with the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. What exactly is your organization's mission?
So the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council is a council under the county executive, and our mission is to create a safe community for victims and families of domestic violence. So we are a board of about 17 people, and 11 of those are agencies that are represented in the county. We have the sheriff's office, the police, judges on both the district and the circuit court. We have Health and Human Services. We also have 6 public members, and those public members one has to be a survivor, one has to be a lawyer that represents in domestic violence cases, and we also have a student, a junior or senior in high school that represent. And so we meet every other month to talk about domestic violence in the community, where are there gaps in services, how can we make survivors feel more safe in their home in terms of services. And so we have 4 subcommittees. We work on education and outreach. We discuss victim services. We also talk about offender program and policies, and also monitor legislation on the state level.
Okay. And Donna, as an attorney and with DVS Legal Services, you do work closely with the Family Justice Center. For victims who have reached the step where they do want to go forward legally, what is typically the first thing that you do as an attorney with these victims?
Okay. Well, actually, before we get in touch with them, if they come to the Family Justice Center, it's a fantastic place for them because there are so many resources available at the Family Justice Center. And one of them is access to legal representation for any type of case that they may be wishing to pursue. At DVS Legal Services, what we do is work with the victim to find out, first, do they want to have representation for a case? The case that they might be pursuing might be a request for a protective order to protect them from physical harm. They may be looking for relief in more of a family law context, such as a custody issue or support issue or divorce issue, and we help them navigate those as well. We also help to assist them to connect them to resources if they're interested in pursuing other legal avenues. There are other legal avenues available and other resources available at the Family Justice Center should they wish to pursue something in the criminal realm or maybe just access other resources like counseling. That's the first step.
Of many, I'm sure. Smita, for your clients who are Asian American, have you noticed any trends in the past, say, 10 years? Are more survivors coming forward? If so, what do you think may be contributing to that?
You know, looking back at our data in terms of the information that we collect with people coming in, it's actually interesting. We did find that the statistic for Asian Pacific Islanders has actually stayed the same. It's about 6% of our clients that come in who are Asian Pacific Islander. However, I will say that that data might be a little skewed because we only count people who actually come into the center. However, the Family Justice Center also answers phone calls from people and do outreach calls, go over safety planning, talk about all their options for leaving an abusive situation. And so since that's on the phone, we don't know their background. So we probably see a little bit higher than 6%, but that's about in terms of the ones that come into the center. And we really make sure at the Family Justice Center that all of our services are culturally relevant. We have the Domestic Violence Resource Project, DVRP, who spoke earlier on the panel. They are on site at the Family Justice Center. So we do have a caseworker that speaks many different dialects of Chinese Mandarin language.
Okay, and Donna, we talked about the different forms of abuse. Emotional verbal is one that is quite prevalent in Asian American domestic violence cases, but that's a lot harder to prove, maybe even to pursue in court. Can you give us a little idea of how legally that might look for someone who's a victim of emotional or verbal abuse?
Okay. Well, certainly in the protective order context, there are some protections for abuse that fall into that category. The protective order, which is often called a restraining order, is intended to really prevent physical harm, but within the context of that, there's also other forms of abuse that lead itself toward physical harm and physical intimidation of another. So within the abuse that is protected by a protective order is things such as false imprisonment, if the person that you're with is not preventing you from leaving a place and using kind of physical intimidation to restrain you. Sexual assaults or attempted sexual assaults fall into that category as well. So a protective order, and if there are threats to harm, such as if you don't do this, then I will harm you or your family members or bring harm to you, are also forms of abuse that are protected. So there may be protections available under a protective order. If there are things occurring over a telephone, there are ramifications in a criminal realm for telephone misuse or harassment or stalking behaviors, are all things that could be protected both criminally as well as in civil remedies as well. Many times, many folks really just want to find education about what's going on. They want to find information about what resources are available so that they can make really good decisions. And the best course is really to look at a combination of legal remedies as well as counseling services that may be available so that real solutions are put in place.
And Smita, Montgomery County is a very diverse county. How well do you think the county is equipped and responding to the diverse needs of the many faces of the victims?
I'm happy that you asked that. We are just releasing our new language card where it's a very simple card that will be available at all the public libraries, at all the health and human services centers, the courthouses, and all it simply says is, are you afraid of your partner? Free help is available. And that is written in 16 different languages. We did a study of the 16 most common languages spoken in Montgomery County, so that includes Mandarin, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Hindi, Urdu, so a lot of different Asian Pacific Islander languages. So I just got the print order last week, so I'm happy to distribute that soon around the county. And we really just try to make sure that all of our services in the Family Justice Center, which are all free, we partner with DVS Legal Services for the legal assistance, in addition to Catholic Charities that does immigration law in our offices as well. So if someone wants a protective order, they would speak with DVS Services or House of Ruth. And then immigration is a large part of, especially in the Asian Pacific Islander community or any community from another country, so they can really help with getting a U visa or a T visa or relief through the Violence Against Women Act. So we really try to make sure that we are providing all services, and the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council was created to make sure we find where the gaps are to then improve all of those services in the county.
And you bring up a very, very good point, Smita, about immigration. Donna, that could be quite a barrier for Asian Americans who may not be here legally, who may not have legal documentation, who feel that they have no right to seek professional help in their abusive relationship. What do those people do?
What is It's an important point that you're touching on, because that can create so much more power and control within an abusive relationship to make the threat to your partner. If you dare come forward, then everybody will know that you're here illegally and they'll deport you, and you'll have all of these ramifications. Another threat is everybody will think you're crazy, and these types of statements to somebody who's the victim of this power and control imbalance and abuse certainly creates a culture where they're not going to seek help. It's a myth, and it's not true. If somebody goes to seek help, the court is not going to inquire about legal status. The folks at the Family Justice Center are not going to inquire about legal status. The courts are there to protect folks from further harm, and they're interested in ensuring that people who are being harmed no longer have to be subjected to that harm. So it would be really important for folks to know that those types of threats really don't play out in the way that they've been made to believe that they would.
That's amazing information that, you know, could be a huge burden off of someone's shoulders if they don't have to worry about their legal status to protect themselves physically in a dangerous situation. Smita, for those who may be watching who are in a dire situation right now, what is the first step that they should be taking?
Well, first they need to know that they are not alone. Domestic violence is such a widespread problem across all races, ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation. It does not discriminate. So it's really important that they know that they are not alone, that people are there to help. We are two people that have dedicated our lives. There are people at the Family Justice Center around the county that help is available, free help is available. And if they are in dire help, if they are in fear of their life and it's an emergency, of course, call 911. If they just like to talk to somebody and figure out what their options are, they can call the Family Justice Center and they'll be hooked up to a victim assistant. And the victim assistant will go through all sorts of services. They'll do safety planning with them. They'll talk about what legal resources are available, counseling for themselves and for their children who are witnessing domestic violence. They'll do career counseling. Financial abuse is an issue, and so a lot of times people don't have jobs, so they can't then have the building blocks to continue their life. So we have career counseling. So again, if they're in immediate help, please call 911. You can call the Family Justice Center, and we will talk with you and meet you where you are, whatever you're comfortable with, to get you the services and help that you need.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and sharing with us what you guys do to help the many victims of domestic violence. That does it for us on this edition of A Closer Look, Domestic Violence. Thank you to all of our guests today. And if you or someone you know needs help getting out of a domestic violence situation, please contact the Family Justice Center. Their website is www.mcfjcfoundation.org. You can also reach them by phone 240-773-0444. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Crystal Park.
We'd do anything for kids. Yet 1 in 5 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org.
This is why you took a second job. Why you taught yourself how to fix the plumbing. Why you'll do whatever it takes to keep your home. And that is why we want to help. We are making home affordable, a free government resource that can make paying the mortgage easier. Call 888-995-HOPE today.
You make me wear my my bike helmet. Taught me never to run with scissors.
So why do you keep a loaded gun in your drawer?
How safe is that?
You asked them to follow some safety rules. Now they're asking you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. Always. Lock it up.
My new dad teaches me all kinds of stuff.
I wouldn't use this one.
He helps me with my decision making.
Ever.
And he's even teaching me how to drive.
And that's why cars have bumpers.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.